Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Examining Trump's Effect on Immigration in Silicon Valley, presented by Alcorn Immigration Law and Early Growth Financial Services. My name is Amanda Young, and I'll be your moderator today from the Early Growth team. And I just have a couple quick notes before we get started. This webinar will last about an hour, and that includes time at the end for questions and discussion. We will also take questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to type your questions into the control panel and I can go ahead and ask them for you. The next thing to note is that the webinar will be recorded and we will send it to all the registrants along with the slide deck within 48 hours. You can also find this recording and all of the other recordings we've done of our webinars on our YouTube channel, Early Growth. Now, before I pass this off to Sophie, our panelist, I'd like to tell you all a little bit about Early Growth. We're an outsourced finance and accounting firm. We work with early stage companies and help them with everything from day-to-day accounting to financial forecasts to taxes and valuations. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelist, Sophie Alcorn, who will tell us a little bit more about herself and kick off today's discussion.
Hi, thank you so much, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here and to be speaking to everybody today. My name is Sophie Alcorn, and I'm the founder and an immigration attorney at Alcorn Immigration in Mountain View, California, in the Silicon Valley Bay Area. And we also work with early stage startups on their immigration options. So that means we help founders, we help members of the founding team, we help key personnel and early employees all navigate the US immigration system to make sure that people who were born in other countries have ways to live legally and work legally in the US on their startups so that they have the chance to build them into amazing companies. So we're passionate about helping startups, and our startup clients are not only in the San Francisco Bay Area, but also all over the United States and all over the world. We have a really wonderful team of 12 people and growing, and we focus on all of these niche startup-y immigration type cases. So it is a pleasure to be here today, and thank you so much to Early Growth Financial Services for this opportunity. So, yeah, this early growth slide shows this fundamental trade-off about what startups have to, the trade-offs that startups have to make, and it pretty much runs the same with immigration choices and trade-offs. But like with keeping complex accounting accurate, it's also critical for early stage startups to keep everything squared away with immigration, because we don't want it to snowball into greater problems down the road, like when you're about to get funding and you're going through due diligence and a key investor figures out that one of the co-founders doesn't have status to live or work here, and then they want to pull out their investment. So it's really important to be cautious throughout this whole process, because you don't want to jeopardize everything that you're working so hard for. Okay, so the reason I started Alcorn Immigration is because I believe that immigration causes innovation, and diversity is often talked about because, well, for many reasons, diversity is good. But one of the really cool things I think that is an effect of diversity is when people from different cultures who speak different languages come together, they bring really unique points of view and ways of solving problems to the table. And so I think when you're in an environment that has very different perspectives, that's when you can imagine, that's when you can create, that's when you can build, and that's when you can innovate. So that's one of the things that we want to enable at Alcorn Immigration through our immigration legal services that we provide our clients. The reason I got started in this is because of my parents. My dad was an immigration lawyer, and my mom is an immigrant from Germany. So I really understand, and our whole team really understands just how challenging the immigration process is and how much stress it can cause for the people who have to go through it. It can often lead to feelings of rejection, being on the outside, not knowing how to find a way in. And one of the things that makes it additionally unfair is that oftentimes the people who have to deal with immigration law, which is one of the most complicated types of law in the United States, don't even speak English as a first language. So it's incredibly, incredibly frustrating for many people. And if you're on this call because you're a US citizen and you're a founder, you probably paid attention because somebody in your life is navigating this process, and you're seeing just how difficult it has been on them. So this is our team, and we're growing. And you know, this is after a green card interview we won for one of our clients. We're very involved in, this is a Mountain View Chamber of Commerce event. We're very involved in the whole Silicon Valley startup world. I went to Startup Grind. This is our office dog, Willie, who visits us and helps us put immigration packages together sometimes. I mean, you can see just from these thick stacks of documents on the table, I think this was for somebody's L1 visa to transfer from a foreign company to a US company. I mean, it can be hundreds of pages of documents that the government requests sometimes. So it's definitely not something you want to navigate alone. We do serve many startups, many companies, and also individual founders with their immigration needs. And you're all on this call because you've been hearing about the news. You know, Trump is in the news every single day talking about immigration. So, you know, whether it's this sanctuary cities war with California that's happening now, or just yesterday the ICE spokesman quit. The Senate is talking about dreamers all the time. This is a really critical issue for our country right now as we're deciding the fate of immigrants and what immigration policies we want to have. But that also trickles down on a day-to-day level to the individual immigration applications of specific people who are trying to stay here. So in this presentation, we're going to be talking about a lot of new trends that we've been seeing for the immigration process under Trump, and what that means for early growth companies, red flags, pitfalls, things to avoid, creative strategies to try to overcome barriers and obstacles. And I'll also be talking about some of the visa options. I've been presenting with Early Growth Financial Services for some time now, so if you go on their YouTube channel, you can also find some of the older webinars. One of them is about different visa and green card options for founders. So in that one, you can kind of get an overview of some of the best routes to be able to get permission to live and work legally in the United States if you're early in a startup team. But today we're going to be focusing on
Hey, Sophie, my audio just cut out.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, so maybe just repeat what you just said.
Okay, so the bad news is that immigration is difficult. It's always been difficult. It's getting harder. But the good news is that it's still definitely possible. There are still many standard routes to move forward. There are many creative routes to move forward. So we're going to be talking about those strategies for how to do it. So, okay, before we delve into all of the changes, I'd like to just tell you about some of the standard words and phrases you'll be hearing in this world. So you have like a glossary of key terms, so you kind of know what's going on. So USCIS deals with immigration decisions within the United States. The consulates at the embassies are run by the State Department, and they deal with people getting visas when they're in other countries outside of the United States. So the consulate would issue somebody a visa in their passport so that they can come here. And once they come here, the people at the airport, Customs and Border Protection, would put a stamp in their passport near their visa saying how long they're able to stay here. And that would be the I-94 stamp. They have an I-94 date. That's when they have to leave by. And then when you're inside the United States and you have that stamp and you came in legally, if you want to stay longer, you could potentially ask USCIS for an extension of status to stay in your, for example, B1 visitor for business status longer. Or you could ask for a change of status, for example, to go from an F1 student to an H1B professional skilled worker. So, and that is all opposed to entering without inspection, which basically means crossing the border without permission. So once you're here, if you want to, or even if you're in another country, if you want to live in the US permanently, you would want to get a green card. If you have permanent residence with a green card, that allows you to stay in the US for the rest of your life, apply for citizenship if you want to, and live anywhere and work for anybody in the US after a certain amount of time. Although if you get your green card through an employer, you do want to make sure you stay with that employer for a while after you get your green card. And then eventually you can become a citizen through the naturalization process. And typically that would take about 5 years, 5 years to qualify for citizenship after you've gotten a green card, unless you've been married to a US citizen that whole time, and then it only takes 3 years to apply for citizenship. So, okay, some of the first, well, going back over the last few months, some of the immigration bad news has been that DACA was canceled. But it's really complicated because now there's been all this litigation. Trump and Congress, Senate have been going back and forth about different immigration bills and plans. It doesn't seem like any of them are going to be able to reach a consensus, but a court did say that DACA applications could continue at least for the time being. So DACA is an acronym. It's the program that is for dreamers, like kids who were brought here by their parents and really didn't have a choice in whether they were going to stay here or not, and they've grown up in the United States. And there are many of these dreamers who are in the startup world. They're founding companies, they're software engineers, and building cool products. They're in marketing and business. So it's definitely a key part of the startup world. And if they don't have a way to stay here, it will definitely affect tech in the United States as well. So, this is something that everybody's watching and has been in the news a ton, and it does affect tech companies and startups as well. Another thing that has been happening is that cases are just taking longer, and this is due to a variety of factors, but a big one of them is Trump. So leading up to the last election, we thought there would be a surge in citizenship applications, for example, but there weren't. And then after the election, there was kind of a lull and a quiet period where people were just sort of watching and waiting, like, what's he going to do? And then after he got into office last year, there was a surge of applications. And this affects everything from citizenship to marriage-based green cards to possibly also employment-based green cards. And so, and the government's been backlogged for a very long time. So basically, unless you're eligible for premium processing, you're probably going to have to wait many months, at least, if not years, to get your immigration decision. And whether you can travel or not during that period is also an issue that's up in the air. Another reason that cases are taking longer is because of Trump's extreme vetting policy. And under, I think for the last 15 or 20 years, under both Republican and Democratic presidents, there had been a policy change where people who get their green cards through their employment, so like if you work for Google and Google sponsors you for your green card, and if you don't have any, criminal arrests or any problems with your immigration history, for the most part, no interview would have been required for you to get your green card. But now with extreme vetting, that policy has been canceled, and now everybody who's getting an employment-based green card has to have an interview. So that's particularly slowing things down in San Jose and San Francisco and other places that have a lot of employment-based green card sponsorship. And then it's affecting the other types of cases that are heard in those offices as well, such as marriage-based green cards and citizenship. So we're seeing the process slow. There is a way to get an expedite request if your case is pending and there's some emergency. So that is something pretty key to be aware of. And basically, if you meet certain criteria, you can qualify. So severe financial loss to a person or a company would be a reason. Humanitarian reasons, like if you have a family member who, is in a critical medical condition who you need to go visit. So there are ways to try to get an expedite request, but it's challenging. We just did one for a very high-profile director of a large organization that needed to take a trip to Europe that tens of millions of dollars of funding were hinging on. And we applied as soon as the company told us that this key executive needed to travel. And we did it quickly. And the kicker was that the government did approve our expedite request, but the conference was in like 2 weeks from when he found out he needed to go. And they approved it, but they didn't send out the approval until week 3, so a week after the event. And it was very frustrating for our client But so that's just a word of caution. It's, if you have a case pending, be really clear with your immigration legal team about your upcoming needs for international travel, so that you can try to have the greatest chance possible of actually being able to go on those trips now that cases are taking longer. Okay, so this is to touch back on something we just mentioned, that with the extreme vetting policy, interviews are now required for people who are receiving employment-based green cards, so for everybody. And at these interviews, a lot of things can be asked about. So from the foreign national's whole immigration history, where you lived, where you went to school, which job you had, then where did you switch, then where did you go, because they're trying to look for any holes, like did any visa lapse and you were still here, or were there any problems? Are you really who you say you are? Do you really have the credentials you say you have? Are you really qualified for this job? They can go into all of that. And in addition to just the standard, like, are you a criminal? Are you a terrorist? Do you have diseases of public health significance? And then also they're going to look at your whole family of dependents that you're trying to help get green cards as well. So do you have a good faith marriage to your spouse, or is this, hopefully not, but what they're looking for is this just a marriage of convenience to a friend who wanted to tag along for the green card ride? So, or even worse, what they're really looking for would be payment for marriage and marriage fraud. So, there's a lot of, some people go to their interviews by themselves, and I always get the question, do I need an attorney, or should I do this by myself? And like, I don't know what the future holds for you in your interview, but I do often talk to people who have, with the best of intention, brilliant people, people who are working at top huge tech companies, running gigantic teams, who try to do immigration paperwork by themselves, and they don't do it right. They don't have, weeks to spend poring over internet chat forums to try to figure out what's actually the right way to do something. And even if you do that, you're still never actually sure if it's going to work or not. So, and then I just see like really frustratingly stupid issues snowball into huge problems for the case. Like, they didn't organize the package of documents the right way, and things got mixed together and confused, and then half of the papers got rejected, and now the case is in some weird limbo state, and we don't know if they're ever going to get an answer, and it should be denied, and things were sent back. And so, it's all about cost benefit analysis and peace of mind. If you're running a startup and you're trying to get angel investors on board, venture capital firms to invest in you, whether it's your seed round or Series A or Series B, you have your area of expertise, and your time, you're going to leverage your time and energy so much more effectively by hiring a good legal team to do these things for you, instead of trying to figure them all out yourselves. So it's really just, what's efficient, and then also what will give both, the employer and the employee peace of mind. And so that's the reason why many of our clients choose to have us go with them to their green card interviews. It's just to make sure that everything's going to go okay. We don't see red flags, but you never know what can happen, and it's not worth their time to take any risk on these things. They're so important to the rest of your life. Okay, so another thing that's going on that if you're in tech you will have heard about is that the H1B visa is under fire. And just to recap, for those of you who don't know, the H1B is a temporary status, so it's not a green card. It can either be a visa in your passport or status that you get once you're here. And it's for a skilled worker who has a professional level of education and or experience to work for a company that has the ability to pay, that has sufficient work for this person to do, and that is having them do a job that actually requires a professional level of expertise. The way the system is set up in the law, there are only 65,000 H1Bs available each year for people who are just being hired for the first time. And there's an additional 20,000 set aside for people who got master's degrees in the United States. And, but the demand is way greater than that. So over the last 5 years or so, there have been more than 200,000 applicants every year for these 85,000 H1Bs. So what that means is there's a lottery, and the lottery is right around the corner. It's coming up the first week of April. So I believe this year the filing window is April 2nd to April 7th, the first 5 business days. And if you think you have an employee who needs an H1B, you should, and you haven't done anything about it yet, you really need to pick up the phone and find a lawyer today, because time is really running out, especially if you're a startup, and especially if it's the first H1B that your company has ever filed.
Sophie, we lost you again.
Okay, so what's been going on with the H1B? Well, Trump hates H1Bs. That's basically the bottom line, which is ironic because I think a lot of his organizations have used. Okay. I don't know if my sound cut out for a minute, but basically the H1B is under fire because Trump and Congress have tons of anti-immigrant sentiment and anti-Silicon Valley sentiment, and they are trying to cut the number of H1Bs. They're trying to increase the minimum salary for H1Bs. Right now, if you pay at least $60,000 a year to the person, you don't need to recruit to see if there are Americans who are qualified to do the job. So they want to raise that threshold to $100,000 or more to try to incentivize companies to hire Americans instead for these jobs. And over the last year and a half or so, no legislative change has been possible. There's been too much squabbling in Congress, and nobody's been able to get together to make a deal about immigration and H1B numbers. And so since Trump really doesn't like H1Bs, what tools does he have left at his disposal to try to affect them if the law isn't going to change? So what the administration has been doing is really heavily scrutinizing the H1Bs that are filed each year. They've basically changed the standards for how H1Bs will be evaluated. And last year in 2017, there were over 50,000 requests for evidence that USCIS sent out to employers to ask for more details about the H-1Bs that were filed and were chosen in the lottery. And one of the issues that a lot of these requests for evidence focused on was something called a wage level issue. Basically, the government is asserting you're supposed to want a professional person for this job, but you selected that you want to have a computer programmer who's only a level 1 wage at the very beginning of their career with not a lot of independent ability to make decisions or manage work or take responsibility. And then they're saying, but how can that be a professional position that would qualify for an H-1B? The government was asserting that, you know, if they're merely a level 1, then it's not professional. And there are a lot of legal reasons why that argument is flawed, and we and many other lawyers overcame many of these requests for evidence on that issue. But the point is, they are incentivizing employers, H-1B sponsors, to pay the foreign worker more so the person can be at a higher level. And they're hoping that will dissuade employers from filing H-1Bs. But in our Silicon Valley practice, I really haven't seen that chilling effect happen. It's like, well, we need the software engineers anyway, so okay, if now we can't pay them, I'm just going to make up numbers, now we can't pay them 95 anymore, now we have to pay them 110. All right, fine, you know, that's cheaper than hiring a recruiter. This person is crucial to our team. They've already been with us on their student work permit, which is called their OPT, for a while. You know, we just got to keep them. It's so hard to hire. Like that's what I'm hearing from employers. So I don't think this H-1B under fire strategy seems to be really working for tech and startups in Silicon Valley as Trump would like it to. But that's good for you guys, because it means there's hope, and there's definitely a way forward. So if you're interested in sponsoring somebody for an H-1B, the time to act is definitely now. And then if you want to hire somebody who already has an H-1B from another company, that can be done at any time during the year, as long as they still have H-1B time remaining. So that's what's been going on with H-1Bs. And let's go to our next slide. Yeah, so this H-1B premium processing issue is a little bit murky as well right now. Last year, premium processing was canceled for all H-1Bs, and that really delayed things, because with the lottery, with premium processing, historically, you would find out if you had been selected usually in May, and then you could potentially expect a decision on your H-1B petition by June. And then you'd have plenty of time to travel and to plan a trip back home, perhaps for August or September, to go get your H-1B visa stamped in your passport and come back in to start working on the H-1B start date of October 1st. But without premium processing, you might not find out if you've been selected until June. Last November and December, we were still hearing about people whose decisions had not yet been made on their H-1B cases. They were still waiting. The wait is a problem for employers, because you want that person to be able to start right away. And it's also a problem for students if their work permit is expiring sometime between now and October. If they get an H-1B approval in between then, they're just allowed to keep working continuously. But if it passes October 1st and they're still awaiting an H-1B decision, they wouldn't be able to stay and keep working. they'd have to stop working and or go home and wait. So we think that there is premium processing in a couple weeks, but last week USCIS did say it would be delayed. So it's a little unclear what that means, but my best guess, based on my experience, is that you can use premium processing for this year's H1B lottery. You can pay for it, you can file for it. But typically the way it works is if you don't hear back from them in 15 days with either a decision or a request for evidence, then they give you that money back. But I think the way they're going to do it is just, yes, you can do premium processing, but it's not going to be within that 15-day window. You'll just have to wait some extra time, but you'll still get somewhat faster processing. So that's how they're going to do it this year. Okay, so another thing that companies do need to be aware of is audits and ICE company visits. This is definitely happening more and more, and especially if you're in California, many startups are, as we are in the spotlight for our pro-immigration stances, our businesses are going to be targeted more for audits, site visits, raids, compliance checks. So this is another reason why if you're building a company from scratch, you want to make sure from the beginning that you're doing things right, that you're getting I-9s from each employee, that everybody who works for you actually has proper immigration documents and work authorization, and it's good to be prepared. So and many HR companies, like if you sign up for a payroll processing service, they have I-9 software, they'll handle that part for you, but you need to make sure that you're using it. And then you also, one of the key things is you have to make sure that you're consistent about asking your employees for documents and your document retention procedures. So for example, if you have 2 different employees, and for one of them you just look at their US passport and decide they can work, and then give them their passport back and just put it on the form and you're done. But for another person, you look at their work permit and then you put it on the form, but then you make a photocopy of the work permit and you keep it in that person's file. You've actually screwed up. You're supposed to have consistent document retention procedures for all of your employees. So a good thing to start early is just to pick, are you going to keep copies or scans or not? And you're not required to. So just make sure you implement that consistently. And then for H1Bs, there's something called a public access folder. So if you've sponsored anybody for an H1B, you want to make sure that your attorney prepared the public access folder for you and that you're keeping that. It's like a physical file, and if somebody shows up at the place of business, they should be able to request it and see information about your company and its benefits and this particular H1B job that you've sponsored somebody for. So that needs to be available as well. And we did have a startup that was recently audited in person, very early stage startup, was just a founder who was a US citizen, and then he started hiring software engineers who I think initially those individuals were from India, and we did the H1Bs for them, and they called us up to tell us that they had a site visit from ICE and they wanted to see all of their I-9s and all of their their H1B documents, and fortunately we had prepared them well. But something that I want all of you guys to know is that if there is a site visit, you don't have to allow them in. You don't have to give them everything. What you should do is ask them to come back. I think you have a 3-day window where they can come back. So you want to set an appointment, like on the 3rd day, you want to have your immigration attorney advise you about all the documents that you need to provide at that time. And you just want everything to be consistent. The startup world is so exciting and it moves so quickly and it's so technology based because that's what it's all about. But the immigration service is still operating to some extent in the world that created the immigration law, which was 1965. So pre-computers, pre-voicemail, I think pre-fax machines. So when they think of a business, they think of a brick and mortar office with desks and employees. It's a completely different model than today's reality of like 2 dudes on a couch in the middle of the night, just figuring something out. So it's okay to be 2 dudes on a couch at first, but at some point, if you want to be able to sponsor more employees, you have to up your game